Some say that faith requires blindness. Others found a more literal interpretation. In the shadow of Boston's oldest church, a circle gathered to witness what no human eyes were meant to see. The evidence was scattered through journals, medical reports, and newspaper clippings, all dated to the winter of 1946. What those 12 followers discovered in their darkness has never been fully explained. Attention, the case you are about to hear has been concealed for decades. Before we begin, write in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is at this exact moment, because this story began at precisely the same hour. The first documented mention of the luminous circle appears in a Boston Globe article dated January 3rd, 1946. It describes them merely as an emerging religious study group meeting in the basement of a bookstore on Commonwealth Avenue. The owner, Theodore Blackwood, a former theology professor at Boston University, had apparently gathered a small following interested in what he called direct revelation studies. The air in Boston that winter was particularly bitter. Snow piled in dirty heaps along narrowed streets, and the wind from the harbor cut through even the thickest woolen coats. But inside that basement, according to witness statements collected years later, the atmosphere was always uncomfortably warm. Blackwood kept a coal stove burning day and night. The windows were covered with heavy black fabric, and the smell. Former members described it as incense mixed with something medicinal. What drew people to these meetings? According to a journal recovered from the apartment of Elizabeth Mercer, one of the earliest members, Blackwood possessed an unusual charisma. "He speaks as if reading from a text only he can see," she wrote on November 12, 1945. When he describes heaven, his eyes seem to look through the ceiling, through the sky itself, into some realm the rest of us are too limited to perceive. But what began as philosophical discussions about the limitations of human perception would soon evolve into something far more troubling. A police report filed in February 1946 noted that several concerned family members had reported strange behavior in relatives attending Blackwood's meetings. Martha Connolly told officers that her husband James had stopped sleeping entirely and covered all mirrors in their home with bedsheets. When questioned by authorities, James claimed he was preparing his sight for what was to come. The luminous circle grew to 12 members by early March. They began to withdraw from public life. Several quit their jobs. Others sold possessions. Theodore's bank records show unusual purchases from medical supply companies, and 3 separate transactions with a glass artisan specializing in unusual containers. But the authorities remained unaware of the group's true intentions until it was too late. According to testimony from the landlord who discovered them, on March 20, 1946, Theodore Blackwood and his 11 followers gathered for what would be their final meeting. The basement windows had been completely sealed with plaster. Inside, 12 chairs were arranged in a perfect circle around a peculiar central object, a column of polished brass topped with what witnesses described as a sphere of impossible darkness. The police photographer who documented the scene refused to continue his service afterward. The few remaining photographs, now stored in a sealed file in Boston's municipal archives, show only fragments of what was discovered. The most disturbing elements were either never photographed, or the images were subsequently destroyed. What we know comes instead from the medical examiner's report, documented by Dr. Harold Williams on March 23, 1946. His clinical language barely conceals his horror. All 12 subjects appear to have self-administered an ocular procedure of unknown purpose. Evidence suggests this was performed ritualistically and in sequence, with each subject witnessing the procedure on others before undergoing it themselves. The final subject, identified as Theodore Blackwood, would have performed his procedure without assistance. The report continues. Small silver bowls were found beside each chair, containing the excised tissue preserved in an unidentified clear solution. Handwritten notes recovered from Blackwood's jacket pocket suggest he believed this procedure would open the sealed channel through which heaven becomes visible to mortal perception. But what did they see when their physical eyes were gone? According to the only recovered journal that continues past that night, belonging to Elizabeth Mercer, the answer was both simple and chilling. "We were promised light beyond imagining," she wrote in shaking, barely legible script. "Instead, only darkness, but within that darkness, movement." Most disturbing was her final entry, dated April 2nd, 1946. "I can still see. Not with my eyes, but with something else, something that was always there, waiting to be uncovered. Theodore was right about one thing. There is another world layered over ours, but it is not heaven, and the beings that dwell there, they know we have noticed them now." Elizabeth Mercer was found dead in her apartment 1 week later. The coroner ruled it a suicide, but certain details of the scene were never made public. The other survivors of what the press called the Blackwood incident were institutionalized at various facilities throughout New England. Hospital records indicate they were kept separate by direct order of the Boston Police Commissioner. What they might have shared with each other was apparently considered too dangerous to risk. A visiting psychiatric resident at Massachusetts State Hospital, Dr. Richard Chen, documented sessions with one of the unnamed survivors over a period of 6 months. His notes, sealed until 1972, reveal a patient who consistently reported visitations from entities the patient called the Watchers. Patient claims these entities have always been present in our world, but exist at a frequency just beyond human perception, Chen wrote on June 17, 1946. According to the patient, normal human eyes actually serve as filters, preventing us from seeing these beings. The patient believes Blackwood discovered this through ancient texts and convinced the group that removing these filters would allow them to see the divine. Instead, they apparently witness something that the patient refuses to describe in detail, saying only, "They noticed us noticing them, and now they won't stop watching." Dr. Chen requested a transfer 3 weeks later. His subsequent medical records show he began suffering from acute insomnia and paranoia. He was found dead in his apartment in October of that same year. The official cause was listed as heart failure. The basement where the Luminous Circle held their meetings was sealed by order of the City Council in April 1946. The building itself was demolished in 1962 to make way for new development. Construction workers reported numerous equipment failures and unexplained accidents during the excavation of the foundation. One worker, Manuel Diaz, gave an interview to a local newspaper, claiming he and others had seen shadows moving against the light when they broke through into the old basement. The interview was never published, but the original transcript survives in the personal papers of reporter Thomas McGovern, who left journalism shortly afterward to become a Trappist monk. As the survivors of the Luminous Circle aged and died in their various institutions, interest in the case gradually faded. By 1958, only 3 members remained alive. Their medical records show a consistent pattern: periods of apparent recovery followed by sudden relapses, typically accompanied by claims that the Watchers had found them again. The last survivor, never publicly identified but referred to in hospital records as Patient K, lived until 1969. A nurse who attended him in his final days reported that his last words were, "They're waiting on the other side, not above us but beside us. They've always been there, just out of sight." Perhaps most disturbing is what happened to the evidence from the case. The silver bowls and their preserved contents were transferred to Boston University Medical School for analysis in 1947. On the night of November 17th, A fire broke out in the laboratory where they were stored. Nothing was recovered. The brass column and the strange dark sphere that had been at the center of the luminous circle were logged into police evidence, but reportedly disappeared during a transfer in 1952. The officer responsible for the transfer was later committed to an asylum in Salem after attempting to remove his own eyes with a letter opener. Throughout the 1950s, a series of seemingly unconnected incidents occurred throughout Boston. 5 different optometrists reported patients requesting procedures to help them see what's really there. A small unauthorized study group was discovered meeting in the basement of the Boston Public Library, exchanging handwritten copies of what they claimed were Theodore Blackwood's teachings. The Catholic Archdiocese of Boston quietly formed a committee to investigate what they termed dangerous misinterpretations of divine revelation in 1954. Their findings were sealed by direct order of the Archbishop. The committee was disbanded in 1957 after 2 members resigned from the priesthood and a third died under circumstances that were never fully explained. A professor of religious studies at Harvard, Dr. Sarah Levinson, attempted to research the luminous circle for a book on modern American cults in 1963. Her request to access the sealed records was denied. When she continued her research through interviews with former neighbors and family members of the victims, she reported receiving anonymous letters containing nothing but drawings of eyes. Her book was never completed. In the winter of 1967, exactly 21 years after the incident, Boston police received 7 separate reports of people gathering near the site where Blackwood's bookstore had once stood. Witnesses described seeing figures standing in a circle in the middle of the night, their faces turned upward despite the falling snow. By the time officers arrived, the group had dispersed, leaving only footprints in the snow, and according to the official report, an unidentifiable black substance frozen in a perfect circle on the sidewalk. The last official mention of anything related to the luminous circle appears in a classified FBI memorandum dated July 28, 1968. Most of it remains redacted, but the visible portions mention recurrent pattern of similar ideation across unconnected individuals and possible contamination through exposure to primary accounts. The memo recommends immediate containment protocol and information quarantine. What makes this case particularly unsettling is not just what these 12 individuals did to themselves, but the consistency of what they reportedly experienced afterward. From separate institutions, without any possibility of communication, they described the same entities watching from just beyond normal perception. Perhaps most disturbing is a detail found in Elizabeth Mercer's recovered journal. In an entry dated just 3 days before the ritual, she wrote, "Theodore made us practice today. We sat in our circle and closed our eyes, trying to sense what exists in the room beyond what we can see. At first, there was nothing. Then Clara gasped. Then Michael. Soon we all felt it. Something was moving around our circle, studying us as we tried to study it. Theodore smiled and said, 'They're curious about what we're attempting. They've never been seen by human eyes before.' When I asked who they were, he simply said, 'The original watchers, the ones who've been here since before humans had eyes to see.' Hospital records show that in the months and years following their institutionalization, the survivors would often be found staring at blank walls or empty corners of their rooms. When asked what they were looking at, they invariably gave the same answer. 'They're right there. Can't you see them? They're looking back at you too.' A night janitor at Massachusetts State Hospital reported finding patient K pressed against the window of his room one night, whispering to something outside. When the janitor looked, he saw nothing but darkness. 'Not nothing,' the patient allegedly told him. 'They're gathering, more of them every night.' They find us interesting now. In 1972, a graduate student in psychology named Robert Thurman discovered several boxes of material related to the luminous circle while researching a thesis on religious delusions. His subsequent request for access to the surviving case files was denied. He was found 3 weeks later in his apartment, alive but unresponsive, sitting in a chair facing the corner of his room. He remained institutionalized until his death in 1979, never having spoken another word. The building that now stands on the site of Blackwood's bookstore has gone through 7 different businesses since its construction, none lasting more than 18 months. Current tenants report unusual cold spots, electrical disturbances, and an uncomfortable feeling of being observed. 3 separate paranormal investigation teams have attempted to document these phenomena, but their equipment consistently malfunctions in the basement area. In 2003, during renovation of the building, workers uncovered a sealed metal box within a wall cavity. According to the contractor's report, the box contained a single journal bound in black leather. City officials confiscated the item before its contents could be examined. The 3 workers who found the box reportedly sought psychological treatment in the following months, all describing sudden onset of acute insomnia and the persistent feeling of being watched. The most recent connection to the luminous circle occurred in 2017, when Boston University received an anonymous donation to establish a specialized research position in the Department of Theology. The donor stipulated that the position focus on the limitations of human perception in relation to divine revelation. The university accepted the donation but placed additional oversight on the research parameters after discovering that the donation came from a trust established in the will of Theodore Blackwood's previously unknown son. What actually happened in that basement in 1946? The surviving records offer only fragments. We know that 12 people, under the guidance of a disgraced theology professor, performed an unthinkable act upon themselves in pursuit of divine vision. We know that whatever they experienced afterward drove many of them to suicide and the rest to madness. Perhaps most chilling is the possibility that Theodore Blackwood was not entirely wrong, not about the divine, but about what exists just beyond the edge of human perception. If the consistent testimonies of the survivors suggest anything, it's that they glimpsed something that was never meant to be seen by human consciousness. Entities that exist alongside us, normally filtered out by our limited senses, and now those entities know they can be seen. Since you've listened to this account, you might find yourself more sensitive to certain phenomena. The feeling of being watched when you're alone, movement glimpsed at the very edge of your vision, the sense that something is occupying the empty spaces of your room, just out of sight. Psychologists would call this the power of suggestion. Once an idea is planted, the mind begins to construct evidence to support it. But the followers of the luminous circle would offer another explanation. You're simply becoming aware of what was always there, watching and waiting just beyond the threshold of perception. And now that you're looking for them, they might begin looking back. The last document was dated the year of 1968. No new records have been found. Some say none of this happened. Others prefer not to comment.